I'd recently gotten into the habit of falling asleep in my chair while watching TV. It was hell on my back, but whenever I tried to shuffle off to my room, I would get knots in my stomach and couldn't pass out. Anxiety. An unfounded sense of impending doom. I'm sure people can relate to the struggle of being unable to keep your eyes open when you're trying to stay awake, then suddenly finding sleep impossible the moment you decide to succumb to it, even if you've made no move to turn off the lights or gotten up. So I would just fight sleep until suddenly I found myself waking up in the morning, sore as all hell. That night I was doing what I always did, binge watching some streaming service until I passed out, waiting for my eyes to sting and become heavy. Except there was a shadow on my balcony. I was instantly more alert than the previous moment, still paralyzed by inaction and admittedly, the laziness that comes with not trusting your own eyes. This isn't real, hypnogenic. I'm on the 3rd floor. Probably just... The shadow froze when it caught me looking at it. It was a person. There was someone on my fucking balcony. I leapt from my chair and stormed towards the glass door, grabbing the steak knife left on my coffee table from dinner. As I went to throw open the door, the person forcibly kicked through the glass so I fell back into my coffee table. There was a wet spot left on my chest whenever I was hit. My knife was gone to the wind. Idiot must be bleeding. What is... I suddenly noticed the spot was cold and that it stunk. Then I noticed something worse. The man was pushing himself through the hole left in my balcony door. I pulled my phone out to call the cops as I made my way back to my light switch where the baseball bat was kept. I'm being attacked in my apartment, I said, then tossed the phone down to free up my hands and turn on the light. I've been referring to the shadowy intruder as a man and will probably continue to do so, but this was no man. It looked like he was covered in hamburger meat. Humanoid, sure, but hamburger meat doesn't stick to a person's body the way this lumbering stack of meat did. It stood before me in all its disgusting inhuman glory, now fully inside my apartment as I charged at it with my bat. A wet thwack reverberated through its meaty body as I slammed my weapon into what should be a face. The meat in its far head splattered across the room while its neck reformed around the bat, then snatched it from my grasp. I bolted backward, now unafraid of getting robbed, and made my way to the front door. The thing charged through my kitchen with swift, sticky steps. The kitchen also led out to my door, and this meaty apparition was faster than me. A lot faster. As soon as I made the turn behind my chair just before the door, it jumped out at me. I tried to turn on my heels, but it caught me by the face in its grip. I tried to push off and started kicking at it, only to be met with gross, wet, juicy smacks into a raw hamburger meat. I was completely helpless, praying the cops would show up to take my place in this grotesque lunacy. I kept trying to escape, but it began tightening its frighteningly powerful grip around my face. I realized I couldn't breathe seconds before I felt myself getting choke slammed down to the linoleum flooring of my entryway. It was soaked in cold, expired blood that had been dripping from the festering meat of this unthinkable abomination. Then, I realized I wasn't suffocating. I was drowning. Rotting hamburger meat was weaving through my nasal cavities, crawling its way into my sinuses and down my throat. I began gagging on the putrid mass, working through my orifices and into my esophagus. The pressure in my skull was threatening to make my entire head erupt in a geyser of decaying meat. I heard a high-pitched ringing as the strings of ground meat began tunneling their way out of my ears. The world started spinning, making me even more desperate to puke out the mass that was clogging up my airways and gut. I felt a putrid ooze leaking out of my eyes as I began blacking out with the sensation of rotting meat squirming its way into my lungs. I started fading just as the disgusting meat man pulled out to a tower above me. "Sir, can you hear me?" The police officer in my doorway asked. My eyes darted around as I desperately scanned the area for traces of the monster. "Are you alone? What have you taken tonight, bud?" he asked, conveying a false sense of concern. I tried to respond, but immediately started vomiting all over the floor. He stepped back while radioing for the paramedics to come pick me up. I continued puking rotting hamburger meat onto the floor, while they made their way up. "Looks like he took something and forgot to cook his dinner," a slightly annoyed cop told the paramedics as they inspected the putrid pile of raw meat collecting into a small mountain on the floor. My life fell apart after that. I couldn't go back to my apartment, so I broke my lease and stayed in a shelter. My social life was abysmal, and my parents were dead, so I tried to find a place where I could be surrounded by people. I was too traumatized by the whole experience to keep working. I made sure not to spend a single second alone. It was helping, I guess. It all could have been like that rock that repels tigers, with the proof being that there are no tigers around. All I know is that it was working. Then the pandemic hit. Suddenly, no one wanted to be close to each other. The shelter shut down and shuffled people around. There wasn't space for everyone. A group of us started camping in the woods for the foreseeable future. The world was a ghost town anyway, until we met a sketchy drifter who roped the others into some shady shit I didn't want to be a part of. So they left me in the middle of the fucking night, after so many promises that no one would let me be alone. Some friends. I woke up due to the lack of bodies in the tent. That's what I thought, at least. In reality, it must have been the stench. It had to be. Or the itch. I felt a deeper dread than I've ever thought possible when I discovered I was in solitude, compounded 1,000 times over when I realized I wasn't. It took a minute for me to grasp that the smell was intensifying, the pungent aroma of rotting meat getting closer. Then I heard a sticky rustling somewhere outside my tent. It was hard to focus because of the restless twitching from my muscles that hadn't noticed I was awake yet. It itched like a burning unease in the flesh itself. It was wrong. Really wrong. The left side of my tent caved in. I stood up as fast as I could, still plagued by the chronic vertigo from my last time. My entire body felt heavy and weak, but the terror and adrenaline gave me the quick reflex to leap on top of the horrific stalker that had stupidly chosen that side of my dwelling to lunge from. I steamrolled over it, causing the tent poles to rip from the forest floor so my tent would collapse on top of it and pin it underneath. I dragged myself through the entrance and took off into the night. I kept running while gagging from the smell, tripping over nothing then vomiting on the ground like a drunk idiot fleeing in some crappy slasher flick. My muscles were seizing wildly and painfully as I gradually made my way toward the nearest road. I saw lights in the distance and carelessly sprinted directly toward them. I could still hear the sticky footfalls quickly pursuing me from behind as the rich stink of decomposition closed the gap. The car slammed into me as it was trying to swerve out of the way, and I was launched onto the pavement on the other side. I woke up in the nearest hospital with a broken nose and internal injuries. And maggots. My entire body was crawling with them. Tapeworms, too. They said it was from when I accidentally ate all that raw meat. When I tried to explain the situation, it earned me a psych evaluation. I woke up later to the new familiar reek of spoiled hamburger. I reached for the call button, but it was soaked in a rancid ooze. It was leaking through the machines behind my bed. Tendrils of putrid, rotted meat were pushing their way out of the air vents. I ripped myself from my IVs and bed sheets, trying to make my way for the door, managing only to slip in blood that was spilling out onto the hard ground. My skin felt like it was squirming, writhing under the pressure of the parasitic infection that was seeking freedom from my body. I felt a sick kindred and understanding with the mindless creatures I was hosting. We were both begging to go home. Okay, let's go then. I burst out of my hospital room to the shock of the night nurses puttering around outside. I sprinted full force down the hallway, only to collide with the wall when I couldn't stop myself from sliding due to all the pungent blood soaking my body. The orderlies tried to tail me, but they couldn't keep up with the terrified determination and probably weren't willing to tackle someone drenched in blood that stunk of spoiled death. I made it about halfway to my old apartment when I noticed the next best thing. The gas station was still on lockdown, so I had to smash through the windows with my bare hands to get inside. I could smell the thing approaching from where the hospital was, so I rooted around the front counter for a lighter as the security alarms blared. I could see it running at me when I got back outside. My heart felt like it was being beaten with a hammer as I pulled out the pump and began flooding the pavement as much as I could. As soon as it crossed the threshold, I started burning the pack of cigarettes I'd also stolen and hucked them into the gas as close to the center as possible. I ran as fast as I could from the devastation I was unleashing and waited for the emergency responders as the entire gas station erupted before burning to the ground. The meat man stood stoically in the same spot it had arrived at, unfazed by the blast, but quickly flash fried into a burnt pile of crumbling meat. I was quickly charged and put on house arrest after that. Even when the monsters are real, you don't get any leeway for destroying public property and endangering others. Not that they believe me anyway. The only shred of evidence was my inexplicably disgusting appearance. I still couldn't understand why I was at a gas station burning 200 pounds of spoiled meat, or explain where the hell I'd apparently gotten it from though. Still, I can't get the smell out of my nose. If that thing comes back, I won't see it coming this time, because everything smells like ground meat.